You do not wake up exhausted simply because you failed to get enough sleep. You wake up tired, distracted, and overwhelmed because the fundamental architecture of your daily life has been explicitly designed to disrupt a very specific, ancient biological window. Before the first rays of sunlight ever touch the horizon, the human body enters a precise neurochemical state, a fleeting sequence of time where the nervous system is primed for absolute synchronization with the Earth's electromagnetic field. For centuries, historical mystics, ancient philosophers, and profound thinkers deliberately utilized this exact window. In the mountains of Galilee, long before modern science could measure brainwaves or hormonal responses, a man rose in absolute silence to execute a highly specific sequence of physiological and psychological actions. This man was Jesus. But what he practiced during those quiet hours was not a simple, passive prayer. It was an advanced, precise spiritual technology designed to unite human consciousness with the fundamental fabric of reality. Today, we are going to deconstruct the exact biological, psychological, and historical mechanisms behind this morning window. We will explore why modern societal structures actively keep you asleep during this critical period, how the suppression of this knowledge shaped modern history, and how understanding the deep science of your own neurobiology can completely rebuild your reality from the ground up. To understand the magnitude of what happens to the human brain before dawn, we must first define what these ancient texts were actually referring to. In Gnostic cosmology, various ancient Eastern traditions, and the suppressed texts of early Christianity, there is a recurring central concept known as the monad. For nearly 2 millennia, institutional interpretations have painted the divine as an external deity, a distant figure sitting in judgment, requiring priests, rituals, and massive institutions to interpret its will. But when you strip away the layers of institutional dogma and look at the original texts, a completely different definition emerges. In December of 1945, an Arab peasant digging near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt unearthed a sealed clay jar. Inside were 13 papyrus codices bound in leather, containing ancient texts that had been hidden for over 1,600 years. These included the secret book of James, the Gospel of Thomas, and other profound writings that the early institutional church had branded as heresy and attempted to destroy. These texts did not speak of a God that you had to fear. They spoke of the monad. The monad is not a separate being. It is the underlying field of existence itself. It is the unified consciousness in which all individual consciousness appears, the quantum fabric of reality from which all matter and energy emerge. Imagine an infinite, boundless ocean of pure, intelligent light. From this ocean, temporary waves form. Each wave assumes it is entirely separate, possessing its own unique shape, its own brief identity, its own desires, and its own struggles. But regardless of its temporary shape, the wave is still entirely made of the ocean. The monad is the ocean. You are the wave. The profound difference between the average human experience and the experience of ancient masters like Jesus was a constant, unbroken awareness of this oceanic nature. They never confused the temporary physical form, the ego, the societal role, the physical body, with the eternal underlying essence. But maintaining this awareness in a densely physical world is extraordinarily difficult. Matter demands constant attention. The body requires sustenance, the ego requires validation, and society requires absolute conformity. Over time, the human brain becomes deeply wired to focus only on survival and external threats, creating a state of profound spiritual amnesia. This is exactly why a specific daily protocol was required. The period right before dawn of N, referred to in ancient Vedic traditions as Brahma Muhurta, or the time of the Creator, is not just a symbolic metaphor for new beginnings or a poetic time to meditate. It is a strictly defined biochemical and physiological window. It is the exact time when the physical membrane between human perception and the unified field of the monad is at its absolute thinnest. But look closely at the architecture of our contemporary reality. We are actively conditioned, from the moment we are born, to live out of sync with this biological window. Human history has seen a massive shift in how we perceive time. For thousands of years, we operated on biological time, waking with the sun and resting in the dark. Then came the Industrial Revolution, which forced humanity into mechanical time, the rigid schedule of the factory whistle and the punch clock. Today, we are trapped in digital time. We are actively encouraged to stay up late, bathing our retinas in artificial blue light that tricks our brain into thinking it is constantly noon. We consume endless streams of fragmented, high dopamine information, keeping our sympathetic nervous system in a constant, exhausting state of low-grade panic. By the time we finally collapse into a restless, unfulfilling sleep, our bodies require heavy, prolonged recovery, conveniently pushing our waking moment far past the sacred dawn window. And the very first thing we do upon waking is reach for a glowing screen. Before our feet even touch the floor, we immediately flood our brain with the world's emergencies, other people's demands, political outrage, and the relentless noise of the digital age. In the first 30 minutes of consciousness, you are programmed by dozens of external agendas that have absolutely nothing to do with your own purpose. You are plugged directly into an attention economy, an energy system designed specifically to harvest your focus and keep you anchored to a low-frequency state of fear and consumption. So, what exactly happens in the human body during this pre-dawn window that makes it so critical to reclaim? The answer lies in the profound intersection of circadian biology, neuroscience, and electromagnetic physics. Let's break down the exact mechanisms at play. First, we must examine the pineal gland and the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Deep within the center of your brain sits the pineal gland, a tiny pine-cone-shaped organ. For thousands of years, esoteric traditions referred to it as the seat of the soul, the third eye, or the epicenter of spiritual vision. Modern neuroscience recognizes it as the master regulator of our circadian rhythms, receiving light signals from the eyes to govern our sleep-wake cycles. But it does far more than just produce melatonin to help you sleep. Under the right physiological conditions, specifically in the deep, undisturbed darkness of the final hour before dawn, the pineal gland is highly active in complex biochemical synthesis. Advanced studies in neurochemistry suggest that this gland, along with surrounding brain tissues, is capable of producing endogenous dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. This is a powerful, naturally occurring psychoactive compound associated with profound states of expanded perception, vivid dreaming, and the feeling of complete boundary dissolution. The peak production of these neurochemicals aligns perfectly with the pre-dawn darkness. When you are awake, perfectly silent, and entirely present during this specific hour, you are literally catching the biochemical high tide of your own brain's spiritual chemistry. You are giving your brain the chemical fuel required to see beyond the immediate physical environment. Simultaneously, we must look at what is happening to the default mode network, or DMN. The DMN is a network of interacting brain regions that is highly active when you are thinking about yourself, dwelling on the past, or worrying about the future. It is the neurological seat of the ego. During the day, under the stress of modern life, your DMN is hyperactive, constantly generating anxiety and maintaining the illusion of your separate, isolated identity. However, during the deep meditation and focused silence of the pre-dawn window, neurological scans show that the default mode network dramatically powers down. As the ego center quiets, the brain naturally enters a state of unitive consciousness, a physiological state where the boundary between you and the outside world blurs. You are physically experiencing the reality of the monad. The second massive mechanism involves the Earth itself. Our planet is not just a dead rock floating in a vacuum. It is a massive, highly charged electromagnetic generator. The space between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere acts as a resonant cavity. Lightning strikes occurring all over the globe create pulsing electromagnetic frequencies within this cavity, known as the Schumann resonances. The fundamental baseline of this planetary heartbeat is 7.83 Hertz. Now, here is where the biology meets the physics. Human brain waves operate in specific frequencies. When you are stressed, working, or scrolling through your phone, you are in a beta state, operating at a high, erratic frequency. But when you enter deep relaxation, profound meditation, or the moments just before sleep, your brain shifts into the theta and alpha states, which exactly mirror the 7.83 Hertz frequency of the Earth. During the quiet transition from night to day, as the sun's radiation begins to interact with the ionosphere, there is a profound stabilization in this planetary electromagnetic field. Ancient practitioners did not have oscilloscopes or modern instruments to measure this, but their highly sensitive nervous systems could feel it. By rising in the absolute stillness before dawn, they were utilizing this environmental stabilization to effortlessly tune their own brain waves to the frequency of the planet. They were quite literally syncing their biological hardware with the Earth's operating system. The third mechanism involves the deliberate manipulation of the human nervous system through breath and sound, specifically targeting the vagus nerve. Historical records and ancient texts indicate that these early morning protocols involved highly structured breathing patterns. One such pattern, widely recognized today in military and clinical settings as box breathing or square breathing, involves inhaling, holding, exhaling, and holding the breath in equal symmetrical counts. To understand why this is so powerful, we must look at polyvagal theory. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body, wandering from the brainstem all the way down into the gut, connecting the brain to the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. It is the superhighway of your parasympathetic nervous system. When you are stressed, your sympathetic nervous system takes over, preparing you to fight or flee. Your heart rate spikes, your breathing becomes shallow, and your body shuts down long-term healing to focus on immediate survival. What deliberate rhythmic breathing does on a physiological level is forcefully stimulate the vagus nerve. It acts as a manual override for your biology. By applying a deliberate breathing pattern, the practitioner forcefully lowers their heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and sends an undeniable neurological signal to the brain that the environment is entirely safe. When this breathing is combined with specific low-frequency vocalizations, like a deep, resonant hum, a chant, or the prolonged vocalization of specific vowels, the physical vibration in the throat and chest exponentially increases vagal stimulation. The vibration releases a cascade of calming neurotransmitters like acetylcholine and oxytocin. You are not just making a mystical sound. You are using acoustic resonance to hack your own neurobiology, announcing your absolute, fearless presence to the unified field. When you combine these three mechanisms, the chemical peak of the pineal gland and the quieting of the default mode network, the synchronization with the Earth's electromagnetic resonance, and the deliberate stimulation of the vagus nerve, the compounding effect on the human organism is nothing short of revolutionary. The immediate, daily result is the complete dissolution of brain fog and mental fatigue. That heavy, sluggish feeling that dominates most people's mornings is permanently replaced by a crystalline, piercing clarity. Your cognitive baseline is completely reset because you have synchronized with the natural frequency of the environment rather than the frantic frequency of society. Your intuition becomes razor sharp. The constant, paralyzing need for external validation, the endless second-guessing, and the chronic indecision that plague modern humans simply evaporate. You begin to operate from a place of deep, unshakable internal knowing, because your nervous system is no longer trapped in an endless cycle of survival and fear. But the most profound, long-term effect of this protocol is psychological sovereignty. A human being who successfully regulates their own nervous system and connects deeply with their internal core before the world wakes up becomes entirely ungovernable. They can no longer be manipulated by the architecture of fear that drives modern society. Advertising campaigns cannot make them feel inadequate. 24-hour news cycles cannot push them into a state of panic or outrage. Political polarization and social pressures cannot force them to abandon their core values. They recognize their own inherent completeness. They move through the chaotic, stressful, and demanding environments of the modern world without absorbing the chaos. They become an anchor of calm in a sea of anxiety. This profound psychological liberation is precisely why such practices were historically guarded, and why the massive institutional structures of the Roman Empire and the early Church found this knowledge so deeply threatening. In the early centuries of the Common Era, as the Church began to centralize its power and align with the Roman state, a massive effort was undertaken to standardize belief. At councils like the Council of Nicaea, doctrines were established that positioned the institution as the sole gatekeeper to the divine. If a population realizes that they possess the internal, biological, and spiritual technology to access profound peace, ultimate truth, and divine intelligence without the need for an external intermediary, a priest, a temple, or a rigid system of law, the institutions completely lose their power to control the masses. The guardians of this knowledge, the early Christian mystics, the Gnostics, and the Essenes, who understood these biological and spiritual truths, were forced to hide their texts in the desert and operate in the shadows. They knew the extreme danger of presenting high-level psychological liberation to an empire built entirely on control and obedience. We can see clear, undeniable evidence of this neurobiological understanding in the historical accounts of Jesus, particularly when we examine the timeline outside of the heavily edited canonical narrative. Consider the so-called lost year, the vast period between his youth and the beginning of his public life, a period where official Roman and church records fall completely silent. Many historical researchers, examining texts from monasteries in the Himalayas and ancient trade routes, suggest that during this time he traveled extensively. He studied the advanced physiological and meditative techniques of Eastern traditions in places like India, Persia, and Egypt, mastering the science of the human nervous system long before Western medicine existed. When he finally emerged to begin his public life, his daily protocols reflected an absolute masterclass in neurobiological regulation. The texts frequently describe him actively retreating to the mountains, seeking completely secluded places long before the sunrise. His disciples would find him at dawn, radiating a palpable sense of peace, unshakable focus, and absolute authority. When the masses asked him how to pray, he gave them a public, safe, easily digestible framework, words that provided comfort without requiring deep neurophysiological work. But his actual personal protocol, the technology he utilized in the freezing, dark hours of the early morning, was a profound process of identity dissolution and energy regulation. He understood deeply that he had to unprogram the false, limited identity imposed by the Roman world before that world awoke. He would actively declare his unity with the source knot as an arrogant claim of exclusive, singular divinity, but as a deliberate psychological technique to collapse the illusion of separation. Statements like, "I and the Father are one," were not meant to elevate him above humanity. They were cognitive anchors, precise neurological phrases designed to permanently wire his brain for absolute connection with the monad. He was demonstrating the potential of the human blueprint. Furthermore, historical accounts consistently note that he frequently paired this early morning synchronization with fasting. From a purely biological and energetic standpoint, this makes perfect sense. The process of digestion requires a massive amount of blood flow, metabolic energy, and neurological focus to be directed to the stomach and intestines. By deliberately abstaining from food during this critical, highly sensitive morning window, he ensured that all of his body's physiological energy and blood flow remained entirely available for profound cognitive and spiritual work. He wasn't relying on supernatural magic. He was utilizing a highly sophisticated, expert-level understanding of human physiology to maintain an unbroken connection to the source of all existence. Now, as we bring this into the modern era, it is absolutely crucial to draw a clear, definitive boundary. Understanding and applying this morning window today is not about performing a mystical, magical ritual. It is not about retreating to a monastery, joining a secret esoteric society, or abandoning your life. It does not require you to adopt a complex new religion or blindly accept an ancient belief system. It is, at its fundamental core, the practical daily application of neurophysiology, circadian biology, and psychological discipline. You do not need to sit in a specific, uncomfortable posture on a frozen mountaintop to reclaim this power. You simply need to understand the basic mechanics of your own body and mind. It is about recognizing, with absolute clarity, that the first few minutes of your day dictate the entire energetic, emotional, and psychological trajectory of your waking life. If you allow a glowing smartphone, an outrage-driven newsfeed, or the frantic demands of a hyper-connected society to be your very first point of contact in the morning, you are willingly handing over the keys to your nervous system. You are volunteering to be a battery for the attention economy. But if you choose to claim that biological window, if you wake before the chaos begins, sit in absolute silence, regulate your breathing to manually calm your vagus nerve, and deliberately set your cognitive intention for the day before consuming a single piece of external information, you are executing the exact same biological technology used by the greatest minds, philosophers, and mystics in human history. You are consciously tuning your neurological receiver to the highest possible frequency before the static of the world begins to broadcast. You are stepping out of the timeline of the matrix and into the timeline of the monad. The science is abundantly clear. The historical precedence, hidden for centuries in jars buried beneath the desert sand, is undeniable. The physiological mechanisms of your own brain and body are waiting to be utilized. The only question that remains is whether you will continue to let the modern world dictate your state of mind, drain your energy, and define your reality. Or if you will take back your mornings, and by extension, take back your life. If this deep dive into the hidden science behind ancient knowledge shifted your perspective today, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming explorations into the mechanics of human potential and hidden history. Leave a comment below letting me know what your current morning routine looks like and how you plan to implement this synchronization tomorrow. Until next time, guard your attention, stay aware, and stay sovereign.